steel and spirit. Why Italy? To understand the phenomenon of the Model 38, you have to forget about blueprints and calibers for a second. You have to feel the spirit of the time. Picture Italy in the early 20th century. A young, unified, yet deeply divided nation, desperately trying to prove to itself and the world that it wasn't just an open-air museum, but a power with industrial and military might. And in this striving, there was a paradox that haunted Italy through both world wars. On one hand, you had brilliant, ahead-of-their-time minds. On the other, an archaic, almost medieval industrial base. Imagine one workshop with a brand-new American lathe, and right next door, a craftsman hand-fitting parts with a file, relying on the experience of his grandfather and great-grandfather. This contrast is the soul of our entire story. You mentioned Beretta, a company that truly is the oldest active gun manufacturer in the world. This isn't just a factory, it's a dynasty. It's a religion. When Pietro Beretta began his modernization, turning a workshop with 130 workers into a powerful enterprise with 1,500 employees, he was staging an industrial revolution within a single industry. He understood the future was in standardization, the assembly line, and machine precision. Yet he never lost that Italian soul, the passion for beauty, for ergonomics, for making a weapon that wasn't just functional, but also beautiful. Yeah, you heard that right. For an Italian, aesthetics are a necessity, just like functionality. Now, for the contrast you just can't ignore. While Beretta was buying state-of-the-art machinery, the Vincenzo Bernardelli factory was using a water wheel. Picture this. World War II is raging. Jet planes are taking to the skies. And at one of the key arms factories of Germany's main ally, power is generated the same way it was in Leonardo da Vinci's time. That factory is the perfect metaphor for the Italian problem. The genius of engineering was there, but the means to mass produce it often were not. And it's against this backdrop, at the intersection of brilliance and archaism, that our main character appears. But his story doesn't start with him. It starts with a failure, with a monster meant to conquer the skies, which instead gave birth to a legend. The monster named Villa Perosa, an idea born from chaos. War is a great driver of progress, however horrific it may be. World War I forced all fighting nations to seek new, more deadly weapons. The Italians succeeded, but in their own unique way. Meet the Villa Perosa Model 1915. The creator, Colonel Abel Bethel Ravelli di Beaumont. His full name alone sounds like a song. Franco-English roots, nobility, aristocracy. And he created a strange creature. Originally, the Villa Perosa was designed as an aircraft machine gun. The idea was to create an incredible volume of fire. And it did. 2 barrels, 2 bolts, 2 magazines holding 25 rounds each. A rate of fire that was off the charts. Imagine a hail of bullets spewing from a plane. It must have been a sight to behold. But here we encounter the first and main problem that would plague Italian weapons for a long time. The problem of the cartridge. The Villa Perosa used the 9mm Glicini cartridge. Folks, this is a tragic comedy in itself. Dimensionally, it was similar to the famous 9x19mm Parabellum, but in power, it was a pale, anemic relative. It's often called underpowered. Why? Because the Italian military feared that a too powerful cartridge would destroy the Glicini pistols, which were far from masterpieces of weapon design to begin with. So you get an absurd situation. An aircraft machine gun, meant to shoot down planes, is firing a cartridge that can barely do any damage. Even when they adopted a special machine gun version of the cartridge, it didn't help. The amount of propellant in it was, as they say, a drop in the bucket. Its effectiveness against even lightly protected targets was close to zero. So, what to do with this not quite a machine gun? They wrote it off, sent it down to the infantry. And that's when the real theater of the absurd began. The infantry use of the Villa Perosa is ready-made material for a dark comedy. They tried to adapt it for everything. The bicycle version, Picture a Bersaglieri, an elite cyclist rifleman, charging at the enemy with this contraption mounted on his handlebars. Shooting on the move? Nearly impossible. The chest-mounted assault harness, a fusto di assalto, this is my favorite. A soldier would strap this beast on with an armor plate and was supposed to advance in an attack. Imagine the weight. Imagine the discomfort. The mobility of such an assault trooper was zero. He was a perfect target. The Villa Perosa had only one single advantage. It existed. Its production was set up at a subsidiary of Fiat, Officine di Villa Perosa, which before the war made bicycles. Talk about an ironic twist. But having a bad weapon isn't the same as winning. Something had to change. And that's when the company that understood everything about weapons entered the scene, Beretta. The alchemists at Beretta, turning lead into gold. By the end of World War I, the folks at Beretta understood the Villa Perosa was a dead end. But it was a dead end with a diamond core. The task was to extract it and cut it. The first attempts were, let's say, straightforward. The MAB 1915 Machetto Automatico Ravelli Beretta 1915 appeared. Ravelli, the father of the Villa Perosa, did something simple. He took one half of his double-barreled monster and bolted it onto the stock of a cavalry Carcano carbine. He added a more or less normal trigger mechanism. The result was something vaguely resembling a handheld weapon. But the main problem remained. The magazine stuck out the top like a horn. Awkward, impractical, weird. And then he appears. The man whose name would be forever etched in weapons history. Tullio Marangoni. Remember that name, folks. And forget the common mistake of Marignoni. That's as wrong as calling Glicini with a hard G. It's actually pronounced with a soft G like Glicini. Marangoni was not an aristocrat, but an engineer, a pragmatist, an artist. He looked at Ravelli's creation and understood. You don't tweak it, you reimagine it. And he did. His MAB 1918, Machetto Automatico Beretta Model 1918, was the first true Italian submachine gun. What did he change? He flipped the receiver. It sounds simple, but it was an act of genius. The magazine was now inserted from the bottom, not the top. This is natural and convenient for the shooter. It changes the weapon's balance, makes it more stable. The charging handle was moved to the rear. The bolt was now cocked by a ring on a special rod. It was an unusual but well-thought-out design. The rate of fire was reduced. Marangoni understood. The Villa Perosa's extreme rate of fire was not an advantage, but a drawback. It spat out all its ammo in an instant and was uncontrollable. The MAB 1918 fired slower, more accurately, more economically. This was a breakthrough, but the world changed. The turbulent times of the Biennio Rosso, 2 red years, and the March on Rome began. The country was in chaos, and the new weapon didn't get the attention it deserved. The MAB 1918 remained in the shadows, in service, but without mass production. And here we need to pause and look at the economic and political context. Why do great weapons sometimes gather dust on shelves for years? Economic and political brief. Italy between the wars. The 20s and 30s in Italy were a time of dilemmas. On one hand, Mussolini's fascist regime craved military power and grand imperial conquests. On the other, the country's economy was weak. Industry was just getting on its feet. The Great Depression of the 30s hit everyone hard, and Italy was no exception. What did this mean for the arms industry? Priorities were set by politics. Money was poured into what was visible and symbolic: giant battleships, airplanes, grand parades. Infantry small arms were often a secondary concern. They were considered expendable material. The standardization problem. The Italian army was saddled with dozens of different, often obsolete, weapons systems. Re-equipping the entire army with a new submachine gun was expensive, very expensive. Autarky. Mussolini's regime proclaimed a policy of self-sufficiency. Italy had to produce everything itself. This, on one hand, stimulated local manufacturers, but on the other, cut them off from advanced global technologies and ideas. It was under these conditions that Beretta quietly, persistently continued to perfect its brainchild. They knew, sooner or later, the country would need modern, effective infantry weapons, and they were ready to offer it. Modifications appeared, the M1918/30, now a semi-automatic carbine. And in 1935, just in time for the start of the shameful Italo-Ethiopian War, the MFB 1935 was born. It already looked like the handsome devil we know, a perforated barrel jacket, a muzzle compensator. It became the prototype of the legend. And here, another key moment. The Italians finally figured out that a weapon needs a worthy cartridge. The enhanced 9x19mm Fiocchi cartridge was adopted. If the old Parabellum gave a muzzle velocity of around 370 meters per second, the new one delivered a full 420. Modern standards for the 9x19 cartridge actually come from these early submachine gun variants. The weapon finally had a worthy round. And then, in 1938, it saw the light of day. The MAB 38, a masterpiece. The MAB 38, the anatomy of excellence. What was it about the Model 38 that captivated everyone, from the Bersaglieri to the German Grenadiers? Let's break it down piece by piece, like true connoisseurs. 1. 2 triggers. Genius in its simplicity. Marangoni ditched the complicated fire selector. Instead, he installed 2 triggers. The front one for single shots, the rear one for full auto. A soldier, in the heat of battle, in the dark by touch, always knew what firing mode he was selecting. It was an incredibly ergonomic and practical solution. No confusing levers. 2. The bolt and safety. Thinking like an engineer, it fired from an open bolt. This improved barrel cooling. But the real masterstroke was inside. The bolt didn't have a fixed firing pin, but a complex, brilliant system with an intermediate lever. Picture this. When the bolt reached its full forward position, a special lever struck the firing pin, which then hit the cartridge's primer. What did this achieve? Absolute safety from an accidental discharge. If a cartridge was deformed, if the chamber was dirty, and the bolt didn't close fully, no shot would occur. The weapon wouldn't spit around at the wrong moment. This was a feature that cared about the shooter's own life. 3. Quality of manufacture. Beretta is Beretta. The early Model 38s were made with jewel-like precision. A milled receiver, careful fitting of all parts. The charging handle was a separate part and didn't move during firing, acting as a dust cover for the bolt slot, protecting the mechanism from dirt, dust, and sand. This weapon was as reliable as a Swiss watch. It didn't let you down. 4. The look. The aesthetics of power. The MAB 38 was beautiful. A long barrel with a perforated jacket, a massive 4-slot compensator, a wooden stock of impeccable form. It looked solid, serious, commanding respect. This wasn't just a hunk of iron, it was a tool. A professional's tool. Of course, this quality had a downside: cost and labor. The MAB 38 was an expensive proposition for the poor Italian treasury. But at first, they put up with it. War and simplification. Evolution under pressure. War isn't a parade. It's mud, blood, and an endless demand for more weapons. Faster, cheaper, more. By 1942, Italy was fighting on several fronts, and industry couldn't keep up. The Beretta factories physically couldn't produce the required number of complex and expensive MAB 38s. And so began the evolution, no, the degradation in the name of quantity. The MAB 38/42 was no longer a piece of jewelry. It was a weapon of war. The perforated barrel jacket disappeared. A heavier, fluted barrel with longitudinal grooves was introduced for weight reduction and better cooling. The fore end was shortened to a minimum. The compensator was simplified. 2 slanted cuts replaced the 4 slots. But the main change was inside. That genius intermediate lever system was gone. The bolt became simple, with a fixed firing pin. The design was simpler, cheaper, more manufacturable. Reliability? It remained high, but it was a different, rougher kind of reliability. The MAB 38/44 was the next step in simplification. After Italy's surrender in 1943 and the division of the country, production continued under conditions of severe scarcity. They abandoned the heavy barrel, returning to a simple one. The recoil spring became a large, simple one, like most other submachine guns of the era. It's sad to watch this evolution, like watching a diamond, under pressure, turn into a simple cobblestone. But such are the laws of total war. The Model 38 lost its refinement but kept its main feature, its lethal effectiveness. Economic analysis, the cost of one bullet. Let's step away from the history for a moment and look at the numbers. What did this path of creating a domestic submachine gun actually cost Italy? Finding exact cost data for the Model 38 is tricky, but we can do a comparative analysis. The Soviet PPSH-41 was the benchmark for manufacturability and low cost. Stamping, minimal milling. Its cost was incomparably lower. The German MP-40, also highly technological, using extensive stamping and spot welding. The American Thompson, on the contrary, was very expensive and complex to produce. The early MAB-38 was closer to the Thompson. It was a bespoke, high-quality weapon. Its production required skilled laborers, good machine tools, and time. For a resource-poor Italy, this was a luxury. The simplified models of 1942 and 1944 were an attempt to catch up with the USSR and Germany in terms of manufacturability. But even in its simplified form, the MAB remained quite complex. This indicates that Italian industry never fully transitioned to mass stamping during the war. It took the path of least resistance, simplifying the existing design rather than creating a fundamentally new one. This economic miscalculation cost the Italian infantry dearly. While Soviet and German soldiers were widely equipped with automatic weapons, the Italians, for the most part, used outdated Carcano rifles until the very end. The Model 38 was a weapon for elite units, not for the common soldier. The post-war era, the long life of a legend. The war ended, but the story of the MAB-38 did not. You don't just throw away a weapon that serves you well. The Berettas remained in service with the army and police of the new, democratic Italy. They were accurate, reliable, and there was simply nothing to replace them with. In 1949, as the country began to recover, the MAB-38/49 appeared, also known as the Beretta Model 4. The quality of manufacture went back up. A familiar crossbolt safety was added. But the two triggers remained, a tribute to tradition and a confirmation of the solution's genius. The final chapter in this story was the M38/57 with an automatic safety, a large button. You could only fire by pressing it with your finger. Production stopped in 1961. The era of the MAB-38 was over. It was being replaced by newer, more modern systems. But its life didn't end there. It became a folk icon. You mentioned the Beretta Model Lupera. This is a superb example of an army weapon going civilian. The Lupera is a sawn-off shotgun, a traditional weapon of Sicilian mafiosi. And many Model 38s, which found their way onto the black market after the war, were shortened and became fearsome tools in criminal clashes. The legend became a myth. The myth became part of folklore. A combat legacy. From the African deserts to the Asian jungles. The MAB-38 fought so much in its long life, it would have been enough for 10 other weapons. The Wehrmacht, the Germans, who always appreciated quality weapons, gladly took captured ones. The MAB-38/42 became the Maskinen Pistol 738I in their inventory, and the MAB-38/44 became the Maskinen Pistol 739I. The irony of fate. A weapon created for Mussolini's soldiers went into battle against the Allies in the hands of Hitler's soldiers. The Bundeswehr, and after the war, West Germany, which lacked its own submachine gun, used the MAB 38/49, designated the MP1, all the way until 1959. Picture it, German soldiers in new uniforms with Italian weapons from Mussolini's time. Quite a historical twist. The Arab-Israeli conflict. Egyptian soldiers used the Model 38 in the 1948 war. It became part of the 20th century's most intractable conflict. Wars of decolonization. The Algerian FLN used it against the French, and the French, in turn, sometimes captured it from the rebels and used it themselves. Photos of French soldiers with Italian submachine guns are a real historical paradox. Around the world, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Congo, Libya, Somalia. The list is endless. The MAB 38 became a true soldier of fortune, drifting from conflict to conflict. And who knows, maybe in some godforsaken arsenal in an African country, this veteran still lies, ready to once again walk the path of war. The lessons of the MAB 38. What remains after the steel and fire? So what is this whole story about? These 15,000 words, the intrigue, the economics, the war? It's about how true quality, thoughtful design, and talent are immortal. The MAB 38 was born in agony, went through the hell of war, was simplified, degraded, but survived. And not just survived, it became a symbol. This is a lesson for all of us. You can have limited resources. You can work in chaos and under pressure. But if your product is based on a genius idea, if it's made with soul and understanding, it will outlive its creators, its political regimes, and even the wars themselves. The MAB 38 isn't just a submachine gun. It's a monument to the engineering mind of Tullio Marangoni, a monument to the persistence of the Beretta Company, and a monument to that Italian soul, where archaism and genius, beauty and lethal functionality are so strangely combined. All right, folks, our journey has come to an end. We've traveled a long road from the clumsy Villa Perosa to the legendary MAB 38. I've told you everything I know and have reflected upon. But now it's your turn. Drop a comment below. What do you think about this weapon? Which part of its history amazed you the most? Maybe you've seen one in a museum or in a movie. Do you know other examples of weapons that, having gone through fire, became true legends? Your opinion, your thoughts, your additions, that's what we're all here for. Let's discuss this legend together. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. It helps us keep making these deep dive investigations for you. There are plenty more stories about steel, fire, and the people who created them waiting ahead. Thanks for watching.